presenter today is Kathy Doyle. Kathy Doyle has been a Master Gardener since 2019. She is passionate about native plants and environmental things, as I am, and she's been actually working on getting a certification for, what's your certification? You're doing it?
Ecological Gardening Certificate up at Mount Cuba.
Oh, good. Nice. So she's like our go-to person that we go when we have to ask these kinds of questions. So I also want to remind everybody that we are Zooming here at the same time that you guys are here. So this is something new that we've been working on tweaking and making everything work. Last time we did it, we had some sound problems. So those of you guys who are here with us on Zoom, please let us know in the chat box if you can't hear us, because we can't tell what you can hear from here. So better to let us know and be able to hear than to go through the whole thing and without being able to hear. So also remind everybody here that it is the sounds, everything you said,
great sounds.
Everything that you say, even if the back of the room, if you're having a conversation, it'll pick up on the speakers. So, and the people at home will hear it. So probably better to, try to keep it down so that we can make sure everybody can hear Kathy. And also I want to remind you people on Zoom at home to put your name in the chat box. We are required to, by the university, to record how many people attend our session. So it helps us out a lot with attendance purposes, if you can just go ahead and put your name in the chat box if you are on Zoom. Okay, and if you have any questions at any time, just type them in the chat box, and you guys feel free to raise your hand, and we're gonna, get the show on the road here. So go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here. It's a little intimidating because I know there's at least a couple of people here who are far more experienced in the world of native plants than I am. I'm still relatively new on this journey, but I feel comfortable saying I know more than the average person does about native plants. So hopefully, if you are pretty experienced in this, you're still going to get something out of the presentation. I'm doing basically a sort of a general gardening introduction with a focus on native plants. Let's see if I can get this thing working for me. Kathy, I need you. Should be able to click. There you go. Oh. Got the arrows don't do it, just do the, okay, I got it. Not an expert on the technology. So this is sort of a general overview. You guys have an outline. People on Zoom, you were, I think, sent an outline. And this is a little bit of it, but I kind of expand each portion somewhat. So if you're inclined to take some notes, you can feel free to do that. I know eventually the PowerPoint will be available on the Cooperative Extension website. So you can always go back, the recording will be, you can always go back to review if you are eager to do that. So first, we'll go a little bit over what exactly do we mean by native plants versus non-natives, what is invasive versus aggressive. We'll talk a little bit about what people at Mount Cuba are calling the old style of gardening, which is just making it like a pretty room, decorative, versus the new style of gardening, which is to make it do something for us, make it more ecological, more sustainable. And I'll be making a case for why that's a really important new approach to gardening. And then we'll look at just some of the basics. Okay, so I know I should be planting native plants. Well, now what? What do I do now? So we'll look at a little bit about site selection, choosing the right place for your plant, talk about sun requirements, soil, composting, and then a little bit about some maintenance tips. So the description on the brochure said that basically this would be some basic knowledge and tools for kind of getting started with native plants. So native plants, every plant is native somewhere, right? But for here where we live, given our climate, there are plants that have been here for thousands and thousands of years, and insects that have evolved along with them, as well as birds. So native plants have been part of the balance of nature over a long period of time. Non-natives are plants that have been brought here either on purpose, because they were pretty, or accidentally, they hitched a ride and, on a boat somehow. And when we're talking about native plants to Delaware, sometimes a native plant can be native to the entire East Coast, east of the Mississippi. Sometimes it's a little more discreet. So you do want to, if you really, want to be purposeful about creating more of a native garden, don't feel like, oh no, it's native. It looks like it's also native in Missouri. It's okay. It's probably still considered native here. So it just takes a little tiny bit of research. Invasive is a term that generally gets used just with non-native plants. At least that's the Mount Cuba standard. And if you guys aren't familiar with Mount Cuba, they are a former DuPont estate. They've been specializing in native plants for a couple of decades or so. And they do all these trials to see which plants are invite the most pollinators, do the best in drought conditions or wet conditions. And it's an absolutely stunning place to go visit. So I will keep referring to Mount Cuba. It's a little tricky to get to, some windy roads, but it's well worth a visit. So they're all about, saying invasive applies to non-native plants and just means a plant that just keeps spreading and it's hard to control. Aggressive is the word we use for native plants. There are native plants that are also aggressive, that are aggressive and can spread like crazy. So just because they're native doesn't mean they're well behaved. So it's just kind of a little vocabulary distinction. You've probably seen pictures like this. These are 3 examples of highly invasive plants. You've got kudzu over there to the far left that's totally smothered the trees. They can't photosynthesize, so they are being killed slowly but surely underneath that blanket. The good old English ivy, this makes me crazy when I see it. Your tree doesn't have to look like that. Just nip it off at the bottom. The ivy will die. It'll fall off. Don't let it choke to death. It's not part of the natural process. It's not God's plan. I walk around my neighborhood and I see all these trees and I just want to set them free. Somebody might arrest me, so I just want to educate people. And then we've got good old Phragmites over there that I always thought was just pretty beach grass, but it's a highly invasive beach grass that has really taken over, almost impossible to control. So now we're just learning to sort of live with it and trying to find what's good about it. Like it does keep erosion in place. So that's a good thing. We don't have to live with the English ivy and we don't have to live with the kudzu. A little bit about garden as decoration versus ecosystem. So we've all seen the neat and tidy. A native plant garden landscape can also be neat and tidy. It can be structured, it can be loose. But we tend to see when we go around to different developments, maybe your own neighborhood, things are like really neat and tidy. You get these little foundation bushes shaped like meatballs and little toads and it's an aesthetic. It's an aesthetic that people like. I guess I won't say any more about that. And that's been sort of the focus. Today, largely, or I don't know if I should say largely, but thanks to the efforts of Dr. Doug Tallamy, who is an entomology professor up at University of Delaware, he has written a bunch of books, and Zoom, I know you might not be able to see these books, but I'll show them to you maybe toward the end of the presentation. But folks who are here, I've got his 4 books that I can't see the titles of. Nature of Hope, Nature of Oaks. What else do we have here?
We have Bringing Nature Home, Nature's Best Hope, and The Living Landscape.
Okay. So he's discovered that some really pretty tragic things are happening in our landscape. He's an insect specialist, so he focuses on insects. He has done more for landscaping and horticulture than any horticulturalists or landscapers have with his study on insects, and I will talk more about him. But because of and he's not just known in Delaware. He's world renowned, and people are really changing how they think about their landscaping, very much because of the kind of work that he's done. I hope there's nobody here from my neighborhood.
Except me.
My old neighbor. You're my old neighborhood.
I'm still right down the street.
That's true. That's true. Yes, and that everything is floriferous. You know what I mean? Beautiful. This is. I now live in a place that there's 5 regions to my neighborhood, and 4 of the 5. This is sort of the landscaping, and it's very tidy. It is not low maintenance, though. People tend to now. Many people have other people who do all of their tidying for them, but weeding is needed. All that pruning to get those gumdrop-shaped trees, and lots of mulch. So it's not maintenance free. And I know boxwoods are something that people find charming, and it's from long ago, and but boxwoods don't do all that well in our area anymore. They've really suffered from a blight. So, but this is kind of the old approach to the traditional approach to landscaping. Any new development, they take out all the topsoil, they build the houses, and they just plunk in plants that are hardy. And it is true that a lot of non-native plants are pretty hardy. So these are the kinds of plants that you'll see. And I'm pretty sure there's none of those are native plants. I like this approach. So the picture all the way to the right is a native plant pollinator pathway at the downtown DSU community garden. And they were all planted, almost all natives along that pathway. And it's quite beautiful when it's in full bloom. And they were planted so that there was always something blooming from April to October. The plants next to the pathway, that's goldenrod, that's a thug, that's aggressive. You gotta really control it. But it's so beautiful in the right place. And it just is covered with native bees and other pollinators. And I know people are like, I don't want bees by my house. Maybe you'll rethink that a little bit. Bees are not gonna hurt you unless you're being aggressive toward them. So that's goldenrod. Not everybody likes that look. And then the pictures to the left, it's a variety of ground covers. Most are native. There's a couple of non-native plants in there, but one of the beautiful things about this is as these plants fill in, you barely have to weed at all. And if there are weeds that pop up, you don't even see them really, so that they're not noticeable. And as they fill in, you don't need to mulch anymore. So, and there's no mowing. You might want to do some pruning. I mean, I have to cut back that goldenrod every year so it doesn't keep spreading. But after about 3 years of hard work, it's a lot less work than the sort of old style of garden. Less work. We kind of all want that, don't we? A little less work. We want to enjoy it.
I had a question.
Yes.
About your mulching around while it's still not as overgrown. It doesn't stop it from growing out.
So the question, I don't know if everyone can hear it, and maybe someone on Zoom can let us know, but does mulching keep like the goldenrod from growing out? It does not, because they've got, I don't know if it's rhizomes, I'm not sure exactly what's going on underground, but the goldenrod is a real thug. Yeah. Yeah, it needs to be controlled for sure. The mulch in the other areas, I use leaf mulch, and it's light, so it does allow the other stuff. It allows on purpose the other stuff to spread.
Hello. I'm trying to rescue a downtown garden scratched up by 2 Leviathan dogs for a couple of years, and I'm discovering things starting to grow. But one thing I don't know where to go for good, honorable mulch that is natural. If you have some suggestions before the end of the workshop, I'd be thrilled to pieces.
Okay, I'll have to give that some thought. We're not allowed to like name places and so forth. I can give a list of
Where I lived
places.
in Virginia, the city provided.
Yeah.
For free.
I've got honorable
Right.
mentions too.
Yeah, I figured as much. So maybe somebody would help me out because I'm like screaming with big ugly bark chips that were left. Thanks.
So let's put this in the, if the people who are handling questions can like remind me to come back to that. And how about if we can save the questions for the end, that way I make sure that I'm staying on time and we have time for the questions. Okay, appreciate it. Okay. What else do I want to say about this slide? Anything else? Nope, I don't think so. This is a picture from Mount Cuba, but it's just a thought. You know, a lot of times we just, myself included, we mulch around our trees, and you mulch to keep the lawnmower from hitting the trunk, to retain the moisture for the roots. And if you plant around like this, it's beautiful and it's providing habitat for pollinators. And you don't want to take a shovel and just start digging, to throw plants in there because you're going to hurt the roots. But if you buy plugs, you just sort of stick them in gently and they will spread, and they're quite beautiful. I have a short video, it's about 2 minutes, and we're going to hope that everything goes according to plan. I know that when we practiced this on Friday, we all had to listen really hard. So I'm going to ask everybody to listen really hard. Let's see if we can get it going. Oh, Debbie. Thank you.
I think you have to exit and then get back to it on the page. Remember, that's what we did the other day.
Oh, we had to.
Yeah, you had to exit and then get back in the slide deck and then click it from the slide deck.
Oh, we're going to do this. That was a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
The ability for ecosystems to function in our managed landscapes in our suburban urban matrix is very poor because we have landscape primarily.
Turn it loud.
We've treated plants as if they were decorations and forgotten all about their ecological roles. So we've sacrificed the ability of all of the land that we've used for our suburban neighborhoods to make ecosystem services that not only support other creatures, but they support us as well. And that's one of the reasons that we're doing the research we're doing. We're trying to generate enough data to convince people that these landscapes can be highly productive. If you produce plants that insects cannot reproduce on and develop on, you are creating a really depauperate ecosystem. What this homeowner has done is put the plants back into this. Most of these plants are indigenous. They are native to this area, which means they are important components of the food webs that originally were in this area. So you have lots of wildlife around, and these plants are filtering our water, they're sequestering carbon, they're supporting food webs, they are supporting the pollinators that keep those plants around. They're producing oxygen. All of the ecosystem services that plants provide are now happening right in this yard because it's not one vast lawn. When I think of best plants, I think of what those plants are doing. And in almost every instance, oaks come out on top. In our region of the country, the mid-Atlantic states, oaks support 534 species of caterpillars. Remember, the birds are eating those caterpillars. So that's 534 species of bird food coming from the oak in your front yard. There's no other tree that does it better. Just for comparison's sake, if you had a ginkgo in your yard, which is from Asia, it supports one species of caterpillar. So there's a huge difference in the productivity of trees. I care about this because we need these living things to run the ecosystems that we need as humans. So we can think of this as we're not making a sacrifice here. You're doing what's absolutely necessary to keep ecosystems running that support us. So it's for you.
So I do apologize for how hard that was to hear. I think the very front row could make out some of it. But his point, which I'm going to reiterate throughout the rest of this, is that insects are disappearing. Insects are the primary food source for birds. Therefore, birds are disappearing. And when we have vast lawns, nothing eats our lawn except Japanese beetles, which we don't want. Birds aren't eating. So his whole emphasis is to try to reduce your lawn and add more indigenous or native plants so that we can bring back start to restore some health to our ecosystem. So I like the video because he kind of summarizes it nicely with beautiful pictures. And he used the art of Rick Dark, who is the co-author of one of those books. So anyway, he mentioned a few different kinds of eco-services that native plants can provide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about water purification, food and habitat for insects and birds, and protection against soil erosion. First, just a little bit about water purification. Let's see if I can do my handy little laser. Boop. Oh, that's so cool. So everybody lives in a watershed. I've just put the little laser pointer over where the Pardee Center is. We live in the St. John's we are in the St. John's watershed here. Everywhere, every place in the country is on a watershed. When the rain falls, it makes its way into the groundwater, and it also makes its way to whatever the nearest river or body of water is. So the nearest body of water for us right here is the St. John's River. And Delaware has the really unfortunate distinction of having the most polluted rivers and waterways in the entire country.
Oh, wow.
Right. Now, okay, I made everybody shocked, and that's what I was looking for. The good news, I guess, is that Delaware also is among the best in the nation for studying its rivers and waterways. So what is likely is that there are other places that are just as bad or worse, but we're transparent and we study the water constantly, and it's always in the news. The St. John's River has the distinction of being the most polluted river in the whole state. Oh, because of all the sewage spills, constant sewage spills. Okay, I won't get into that. There are things that, we can't control the sewer system, really, except contacting our officials about, making it better. But we can do some things to purify our water. And if, every lawn in Delaware added, a quarter of its space to native plants, we would go a long way into doing a lot for cleansing our water. So here's just a pretty cool slide to show you. Where is it? Oh, I have to get rid of my laser. All right. So non-native plants, they're pretty, they're great, but they have pretty shallow roots. And notice what it says for turf. Okay, that's our lawn. Lawn has really shallow roots. And if most of our lawns have these, if most of our property is lawn, then the water is not getting cleansed and the soil is not getting enriched. So if you can start throwing in some of these natives that have these beautiful deep roots that take the water as it's coming down, they purify the water. They also take in carbon, and they also help to sort of add to the quality of our soil. It's a really simple thing that we can all do. So that's sort of my point about native plants and water purification. Food and habitat for insects and birds was the second ecosystem that I mentioned and that Doug Calloway mentioned. And in his book, Bringing Home, one of the really powerful quotes that he had was that there has been a 50% reduction in population sizes for many of Delaware's bird species within 50 years. That's probably now 60 years. I think it's staying still at 50%. I don't think it's increased. But if you guys just think about what has happened in Delaware and everywhere else in the last 50 years, development. So, and all that development takes away the forest that was there, the land that was there, replaces it with concrete and turf, and that has an impact on the insects, where the insects can live and where the birds are living. So that's a really powerful quote. And then the bees, the poor bees. And it's not just honeybees that are in decline, it's all bees. And Delaware has about 200 native bees. There are something like, 800 native species of bees, maybe along the East Coast. Delaware is home to about 200 different species of bees. Bumblebees, sweat bees, mining bees, there's all sorts of bees. And specific bees pollinate specific plants. So the more variety you can have, the more bees will have a place to do their thing. And when they're foraging, they're not going to hurt you. Most bees are not inclined to hurt you. So, we have carpenter bees everywhere, which I'm not crazy about. So, but I'm working on planting plants for them further away from our house. But I'm constantly just walking through swarms of carpenter bees just to get to stuff, and they don't pay me any attention. Thank goodness. But bees do most of the pollination, and pollination is what we need if we're going to eat. So, whether you like plants or not, everybody likes to eat. So this is a really important reason to try to start adding some more native plants to your landscape. And Debbie Nicole has done a really wonderful presentation about native bees in Delaware, and that should be on the Master Gardener website. Yeah. Yes.
I've never looked at it, so I don't know how it turned out.
Okay. Well, we'll get that, how to get to the website and find all the past workshops for you by the end of this. Just some sad headlines. Really like that middle one. The insect apocalypse is here. So recent studies are saying that about 40% of insect species are in decline. And that's a concern for a lot of reasons. As species disappear, that starts to cause major problems in our whole ecosystem. And the beautiful monarch, I'm sure people are aware that monarchs, which used to be a familiar sight, they're plummeting too. There's been between an 85% and 90% decline in monarchs, which is just tragic. They're so beautiful. And they also, they do some important work for us. They're not just beautiful. Lots of reasons that they've gone in decline. And I'll mention a few in a minute. So this idea of losing these beautiful butterflies and bees and other insects, it's like the game of Jenga, right? As you try to keep things in balance, and at some point the whole thing can come crashing down. So really important to try to not let those species disappear. If for no other reason than for our own selfish reasons. We want to eat. Lots of reasons that these insects are disappearing. Non-natives are replacing natives, and then the invasive ones, as they take over. I mean, you've all probably driven up and down Route 1 and you see what look like really beautiful white flowering trees. They're horrible. Those are the Bradford pears that have escaped, and they are highly invasive. And as they take over the land, nothing else can grow there, and they don't feed anything. They are pretty, but, beauty alone is not enough. Another reason for the decline is there's definitely been an increased use of pesticides. There's a time and a place for using pesticides and herbicides. I'm not going to go into that today, but I just think of my own neighborhood, and I won't name any companies, but it seems like every other house gets sprayed every other week to try to get rid of the mosquitoes. But that spray isn't just killing, it is killing the little mosquito larva. Nobody really likes mosquitoes, although there are insects that like mosquitoes. There's birds that like mosquitoes. But the larva gets killed, and the next day the mosquitoes have laid new eggs. So you've done away with the baby mosquitoes for 12 hours. Mosquitoes know how to fly. They're going to come back. So it's they not only kill the little larva of the mosquitoes, they're killing the larva of other insects as well, the good guys and the bad guys. And when you learn how to do sort of an integrated pest management, where you've got your house is surrounded by the good guys, the good plants and the good insects, a lot of those mosquitoes get taken care of, thanks to Mother Nature. Climate change is another reason. As things are warming, the insects, the birds, they're either dying out or they're moving somewhere else. And I'm not going to get into a conversation about climate change. Debbie did do also a great workshop about how climate change is impacting our gardens and how to sort of adapt to that. So that's another workshop you might want to look for that's online. The one I'm going to spend the next couple slides on is habitat loss, because that's the easiest thing to see, and it's the most obvious cause of the decline of all of these insects. Another great quote from Doug Talamy: "We're losing our birds because we've taken away their homes and their food. So they're basically just starving." This is an aerial view of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And from 1990 to 2000, the impervious surfaces, like roads, increased by 40%. So before 1990, that was a lot greener. I know it's kind of hard to see. But now you see buildings, lots of buildings and lots of roads. So, as our nature disappears and is replaced with development, then the insects need to go someplace. So I'm not trying to argue we shouldn't build any more houses, but I am trying to argue that maybe we try to flip this picture a little bit, instead of having mostly lawn, because lawn is useful. Right? Children play on lawn. We like to sit on chairs on lawn. Lawn provides pathways. But I don't think these folks are walking all over that lawn. Maybe try to flip it, make some nice pathways of lawn, but really fill that picture with trees and with other plants. This is sort of the norm. This is what we tend to see. But if you own your house, you have your own private property and you can plant what you want. If you don't own your house, you can talk to your landlord about this. If you live in an apartment and you have a little patio, there's lots of cool things you can do with containers to plant native plants and bring pollinators to your home. So this is a point that Dr. Talamy made. One native oak tree can support 534 Lepidoptera species. And Lepidoptera are moths and butterflies. And when they're babies, they're larvae, they're caterpillars, and that's what baby birds eat. That's the main diet of baby birds. So when the birds can't find the caterpillars, the baby birds starve. So if you've got the space, plant an oak tree. They're pretty big. And it takes thousands of years. You can't just wait for our native insects to adapt to some of those non-native plants. It's just not gonna happen. Eucalyptus trees are abundant in California. They were brought in here in the 1850s because they smell so nice. They support one species. Where they're native in Australia, they support 48. Wow. So they're great trees, just not here. Just a few other little non-native facts. The Kusa dogwood, which is a common Japanese dogwood, beautiful, but basically support nothing. They're just pretty. Yeah, there are native dogwoods that are every bit as beautiful, that support lots of wonderful wildlife. Good old green giants. We've got 2 of them in our property. I didn't put them there. But I'm not going to cut them down. I just pick off the bagworms, because that's what likes to live there. That's not really the kind of insects we want to be bringing to our homes. Good old tree of heaven was very popular because it turns a beautiful red. It's a horrible plant. It's illegal now to be sold. It is the host plant for spotted lanternfly and for stink bugs. Those aren't the kinds of insects we're wanting to bring to our homes. You guys have this handout. It's a Doug Towney handout. He's given permission to distribute it. And it just shows you some of the different plants that are wonderful to host the good guys. Now, I do want to point out, you'll see on this list plants like honeysuckle and geraniums and iris. You want to make sure you're planting the native ones. There are non-native honeysuckle, non-native iris, non-native geraniums.
The one you gave us doesn't match the perennials.
No, it doesn't.
Ah, you're kidding.
No, ours starts with goldenrod, then strawberry, sunflower. And then it says Joe Pye, violet, switchgrass. It's not exactly the
Asters and
same.
stuff are left out of there.
Well, dang it. I apologize for that.
Do you have a printer here?
You sure are right about that? Huh. I'll have to,
You got the trees right, but
Yeah.
not the print.
so it's missing, is it actually missing some?
Yeah, sedges aren't there, morning glories aren't there.
Oh, I apologize for that. I don't know.
It probably updated since you made
It probably did update since I made the slide. Okay.
Everything changes all
So-
the time.
The slide is older than this came out. But we can figure out how to get you both. Trying to figure out how to do that.
I'm sorry, do you have a botanical name for tree of heaven?
Alianthus,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
but don't quote me on the exact,
Yeah, it is.
but I don't know if I said it exactly correctly. If Carla was here, she'd tell me.
Alianthus.
Alianthus, there you go.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about where to start here. This should hopefully go a little bit more quickly. You want to make sure you have your plant in the right place. You can spend all this money on beautiful plants, and if you don't pay attention to where they grow best, you just wasted a ton of money. This is a picture from a neighbor. Used to be a beautiful bed of rhododendrons because there were two big trees that shaded it. They decided they didn't like trees anymore after that tornado we had a few years ago, which I totally get it. They removed their trees, but now their poor roadies are really sad. They need a new place to go, and different plants are going to belong here. So how do you know what's the right place? You want to know your hardiness zone. You want to know something about the sun, the soil, water availability. If it's super windy, some plants are a little bit sensitive to that. You want to pay attention to the wires overhead. You see those sad trees along the side of the road, and they've been put so that they're like a big chomp out of the center of them, because the wires have to go through. And obviously, be careful of anything underground. Make sure you call Miss Utility before you start digging anything. You want to know the growth habits. You know, that pretty little, rhododendron is going to get tall and wide. So make sure you know the space. So select plants that are suited to what's the existing growing conditions. Plant hardiness, I think probably most people are familiar with this. Delaware is in zone 7. So basically that means any plant can tolerate as cold as about 0 degrees. So you don't want to be planting any plants that are meant for like zone 2. They're not going to do well here. Or even more accurately, zone 10. In a lot of cases, it just gets too cold here. But pay attention to the hardiness zone. That's always featured on the little tags that you get with a plant when you buy it at a nursery. For sun, full sun full sun is 6 or more hours of sun. Part sun is 3 hours in the morning. It's a little more tolerant to sun than part shade. They're fairly interchangeable, part sun, part shade. But if you're finding that a plant isn't doing as well as you think it should, it's possible that maybe it's getting a little too much sun. So part shade, you want to shield it from the afternoon sun. And then full shade is less than 3 hours. Full shade doesn't mean it's completely dark. But it gets less than 3 hours of direct sunlight. So pay attention to what the sun requirements are of your plants. And then we'll spend a few minutes on soil. It is not cool to use the word dirt anymore. Dirt is what, the floor of my kitchen is dirty. But soil is what plants are planted in. And when we don't take good care of our soil, an extreme example is the Dust Bowl from the 1930s, where, they didn't really know any better, and there was an economic incentive to keep planting the same stuff, cut down all the trees, planted corn over and over and over and over again, and they just killed the soil. The nutrients didn't have time to come back to the topsoil. So topsoil turned to dust, and people pretty much lost everything. Again, the native plants, the nice deep roots, they keep things intact, they nurture the soil, they're a great solution for helping to maintain some nice soil. A soil test is a great idea. I strongly recommend it. And then I'll talk a little bit about the soil food web. But soil tests are especially useful if you've moved into a new development. They're especially useful if your plants are not thriving and you can't figure out why. They're especially useful if you just want to start from scratch. And they're useful if you want to know if there's lead in your soil or anything like that. They're very easy to take, to do, and to get the results. So quick little bit about them. Most of our plants like to be somewhere in the 6, 7, 8 pH zone. There are some plants that like to be a little more acidic, some plants that like to be a little bit more alkaline. So the soil test will tell you what the pH is. So funny story, I really, really wanted blueberries at my old house. I had a pretty little white picket fence. And when I grew up in a house that had a little white picket fence, we had blueberries and they were great. We loved them. So I was sure I was going to plant blueberries. I did do the soil test. They said to me, not great soil for blueberries. It needs to be more acidic. Why don't you plant something else and put your blueberries somewhere else? I was like, no, they look so pretty against these. So I followed the instructions of how to amend the soil loosely. I wasn't nearly as scientific as I should have been. My blueberries did not thrive. They were pretty sorry looking. And I wasted a trip to New Jersey to get my native blueberry plants. I wasted lots of flavor, lots of mulch, lots of money. It was just downright dumb. I've learned a lot through all my mistakes. But you tell them when you do the soil test, you tell them what you would like to plant in this area. And then they tell you whether that's a good place for you. And there's a lot more information that you will get when they mail it to you and they email it to you. Debbie Nicole has also done a great workshop on soil tests. And she goes into a lot more detail than obviously I can for purposes of this. Just know that soil tests can be super helpful and save you tons of time and tons of money. I do have on your handout, I gave you the URL for the soil test, but honestly, if you just go to Mr. Google and you type in soil test, University of Delaware, it's going to take you right to the page. It's going to tell you, which kind of soil test do you want, and it gives you all the instructions. They sell them here, $17. You can get it here. The instructions are easy. Just fill a little bag with soil, but follow the instructions because there's more to it than just that. And then you bring it back here and they mail it off for you. You can also just purchase it online. So very, very worth the money. Really worth the money. Okay, topsoil. that's the stuff that all blew away during the Dust Bowl. It's the top 2 to 8 inches of soil. It is the gold. It's the gold for growing our plants. It contains the nutrients. It absorbs carbon. It filters water. It is degrading so rapidly, there's a concern we could run out of it in 60 years. So, and it degrades from every time a new development goes up, they've just torn up that topsoil. So, but there are ways that we can help sort of conserve our soil and feed it. And I'm not talking about fertilizer. So a couple words about how to take care of our soil. Those top 8 inches are where the food web is. And all these little critters, you've got bacteria, you've got fungi, you've got nematodes, you've got earthworms, you've got all sorts of plant roots. All of that is just constantly feeding and nurturing the soil. When you go in and you till, you've just torn that up. Tilling is no longer cool. Don't till. When you pour lots of herbicide on it because you want to kill this whole area, you're also killing some of those little critters. So there's some natural ways you can do that. Now, sometimes that's what you have to do in order to get rid of a massive invasive area. But a lot of times we don't have to go to those extremes. Let's see, anything else I want to say about that? Yeah. When your food web is healthy, it suppresses disease. You know, all those little bacteria and fungi, they're all balancing each other out. All that stuff that's going on there gives you the nutrients that you need. When you pour fertilizer in there, it messes with the balance. Fertilizer gives a good boost of green health briefly, and then it leaves things depleted. So try to avoid, when possible, using fertilizer. All those critters are building soil structure, and they're also increasing the water holding capacity. A great way to rebuild your soil is compost. Compost is really remarkably easy to do. There's 3 types. There's cold, hot, and vermicomposting. I'm not going to talk about vermicomposting. It's the use of worms. You actually purchase kits. I've known people who are fanatics about this. They are so into it, and it produces the best compost. I had a very good friend who kept her little worm farm in her basement. Every time she went away, someone had to come over and feed the worms. And every day she got tons of beautiful compost. But when people didn't come feed her worms, they died. So anyway, it's a little scientific. There's lots of videos out there about how to do it. But that's as much as I'm going to say about that. Hot compost is super effective. It also takes some labor. You need a thermometer. I'll talk about the greens and browns in a second, but greens are, well, anyway, you want a ratio of 1 to 2. I've seen other ratios as well, but this is what keeps cropping up at Mount Cuba, so that's what I'm going to go with. And you take the temperature. You piled everything into your compost pile, and after a week or 2 or 3, you take the temperature. If it hits 150 degrees, you turn it. You wait a few days. When it hits 150 degrees, you turn it. You do that 5 times, and then you've got beautiful compost. It only takes a few weeks. And all that compost is all that soil food web, all those little bacteria and fungi, they're doing their work. They're up there in your compost chomping away. The greens are anything green. Vegetable scraps, coffee grounds are considered greens. Stale bread is a green. Cooked pasta, uncooked pasta is a green. Rice, oatmeal, eggshells. Crunch them up a little bit because they take a long time to decompose. Anyway. Browns, brown leaves, cardboard, junk mail, don't include your plastic. Newspaper, dead plant clippings, pine needles. We could probably save, I've seen statistics for this, but the vast majority of stuff you throw in your garbage, you can compost. It doesn't have to go in your garbage and get all stinky there. This is what I do. This is lazy composting. It's passive, it's static. We just throw stuff. That's our little, not very attractive compost bin. And we just throw stuff in there, and I'll just turn it a little bit. And after about 6 months, I've got beautiful black gold in the bottom. And I use that I just, put it in my soil. I spread it around and it feeds the soil. It's instead of fertilizer. It's really easy. So easy. If it gets stinky, it means you've got too much green stuff in there. So just throw in some shredded newspaper and it'll unstink. You don't have to throw it away. And then the last point, couple points to talk about is just some maintenance things that mostly have to do with dealing with weeds, because we don't like weeds. You can kill them in advance by putting black plastic over the area if we're not talking about, a huge field. And if it's this time of year, after about 6 weeks, the weeds have been killed. If it's, you plant this, you want to lay down the plastic in the fall and leave it over winter, the weeds will be killed. Our house is covered black plastic. I'm sure you've seen some pictures from my neighborhood. I'm not sure what they think of our gardening technique, but they will love it when they start to see what grows there. We moved there 3 years ago and it was covered with invasive vines and everything. So we've had a lot of work to do. Another way to deal with weeds is plant those things closely. I know the little card says, 6 inches apart, 12 inches apart. You can plant them close and then you can thin them out and pull out those extra plants and put them somewhere else next year. So you plant them nice and close. There's no room for the weeds. If there's bare dirt, bare soil, the weeds are gonna come through. And for lawns, you can just, aerate your lawn, easier said than done, and just keep reseeding it. And you just create a thicker and thicker lawn so that smothers the weeds out. Malacuba has a lot of lawn area. They don't use any chemicals. They just use compost and compost tea, which is a whole other thing that they spray on their lawn. And they have a few weeds, but that's okay. This is a little section of our yard right now. I'm moving my little rock border out, so I'm going to kill what's underneath there, and then move some plants over there. It's really effective, and you just reuse the plastic over and over again. Don't bury the plastic under the soil. Cover crops are another thing that you can use. I included a link for UD's information about cover crops. Also, there's a cover crop for everything, and you can, seed it in maybe in the fall in an area you're going to put a garden bed in the spring, and over the winter you get this little cover crop that grows. And then in the spring, that cover crop has nurtured your soil. It's kept the weeds out. And you can actually sort of cut down the cover crop. You can gently turn it. You're not really tilling. You're gently turning it after it's done its job. You can also leave the leaves. Okay, this is a little Sweet Bay magnolia we planted 2 years ago, and we just surround it with the leaves instead of surrounding it with compost. And in the winter, don't be all hung up about cutting things down. Leave those buds for the birds. I left my goldenrod up, and I just think it looks so pretty covered with snow, and it still had little bits of seeds and so forth for the birds to get. So we sort of leave things up through the winter, and just last weekend we finally cut things down to clean it up and get ready for spring. So in summary, add more natives, make sure you're putting them in the right place. You want to get your soil tested and respect your soil. Use compost, learn how to do compost. It's so easy. And it's just amazing how little garbage we have anymore. We don't eat a lot of meat. Don't ever throw meat in your compost. That's not good. Leave your leaves where you can, and then just enjoy. So sources, if you're interested, things about the Master Gardeners. We have these workshops. We have our garden advice program. We have a helpline. And we've got a deadline coming up for if you want to be a Master Gardener. Anybody know what that deadline is?
May 26th, something like that. There's a brochures out here on the table for all of these things if you're interested.
This is our non-discrimination policy. First statement. Questions?
There's a couple on Zoom if you want me to address those, and I can tell you. Well, I know the answer to a couple of them, but somebody on Zoom, if you joined Zoom and you originally signed up for in person, if you signed up for Zoom, you got the handouts emailed to you already. If you signed up for in person but you came on Zoom instead, I have your attendance here, and I will send you a follow-up email, and I will include those handouts, so you will get those also. And somebody asked about previous recordings. I also dropped that link in the chat box. If you go there, you can check and go to the Delaware State University webpage, which is also on your, I sent it to you in like every email, so it's there somewhere. It's also out here on our brochures for workshops. You can see anything that we've recorded previously, like Kathy told you. The native bee workshop is on there. The soil testing workshop is on there. The I did about climate change is on there. And somebody asked about invasives, and Kathy and I also did one together last year, I think, on replacing invasives in your space with native plants. So those are all on there, and you have access to those. And then the other question is for you. Somebody asked, other than kill the weeds, what does soil sterilization do to the food web?
Soil sterilization.
I think you had a slide about soil sterilization, or
I think she's referring to when people put too much fertilizer or keep planting things.
No, it's using the black plastic.
the black plastic.
Oh, and okay, so black plastic. And I'm sorry, what's the question?
Barry, you just want to ask her yourself?
Certainly. You use the black plastic to kill the weeds, but what does it do to the rest of the soil web?
Well, it's my understanding, and based on having done this before, when I pull this plastic up, those little critters, they are moving around. It's my understanding that they are still doing just fine, because there's still a lot of oxygen under there. I don't know if I had tried to cover an entire, I don't know, a huge area, let's just say. My guess is the center of that area might suffer, because all those little critters, they do need oxygen. But this is like the size of a flower bed. I did do black plastic in a much larger area that they had for whatever reason planted bamboo. And it was a pretty big area, like maybe, I don't know, a quarter of this classroom, which you guys on Zoom probably can't see. So we pulled up the bamboo. We did apply some glyphosate, I always say that wrong, to the stems. We didn't spray willy-nilly. And then we covered with black plastic. What I discovered was a bad thing about that was we had done such a good job that our trees there weren't getting water. So I then had to go back and add little breathing spaces throughout where they could get the water and get the oxygen. I hope that helps. Anita.
Kathy, I have used cardboard where you're using the black plastic, and I've done some pretty large gardens, and you don't have the oxygen problem. One problem that is getting worse is it's harder to get the cardboard, and I've actually gone dumpster diving to get it because
Go to Aldi's.
Pardon me?
Go to Aldi's.
Yes.
Because they have lots of cardboard.
If you ask for it, you might get somebody who'll give you, they now package it all up, they cordon it all up, and they get ready to send it away. But if you catch them at the right time, they'll give you, and that really has proved, I don't have to take it off.
Yeah.
And it's oxygenating, and it holds the water too. If it rains, I've got water held down there on that surface.
That's a great point. We've also used cardboard before, for sure. And it does a great job, and it slowly decomposes over time, and it becomes mulch, and it becomes soil, and you just poke the holes in the cardboard, and you can plant right away.
Yes.
And you don't have to wait for everything to be killed. Yeah. Bev?
Newspaper. Actually, we're getting a lot of paper bags now since the plastic has been
Good point.
done. And that really works good too. And the rain decomposes it and it breaks down after a while. So it really works good. Cardboard and that brown newspaper. Not newspaper. I keep saying newspaper. The
Craft paper.
bags that you get at the grocery store, the brown paper bag, craft paper. Thank you. Who said craft paper? I love it. I can't always thank you.
But newspapers work too. Newspapers work too, but you gotta lay a thick, about 2 or 3 inches. So
Right.
if you still get newspapers.
Any of that stuff.
Yes, ma'am.
When you say the oaks are so wonderful, what kind of oaks are you talking about in Delaware? Because we bought our house and there are 4 large, beautiful oak trees. But one of them, the branches are starting to die. So we went to that place, the Delaware extension, I don't know what it is, and we had a tree lady come. It's free for Delaware. And she said that our oak tree, I think she said we had a pin oak. And she said it's got some kind of fungus in it that's slowly killing it. And so then we called someone else who could tell you about trees, but also could cut them down. And it's going to cost a fortune to cut these trees down. So we're praying that the tree will do better. And we're waiting to see. Our neighbor across the street had one of them and it died totally. And so he cut his down and it was a big one too. So like right away when I heard this, I was like, why did they plant these oaks? These are bad. And then on the side of our house, we have those Leland cypress, which is another not good tree. And we have 2 Bradford pears in the front. So in the year that our house was built, these trees must have been very important and lovely or whatever. And people did this. And we're trying to manage without spending, pockets of money. So when you talk about the oaks, I like oaks. We had oaks growing up, never had these kind of problems. So, here in Delaware, I'm just like, whoa, what is it with these trees?
So oak trees are suffering from some particular disease. And people always ask Doug Tallamy that. They said, but oaks are kind of, they're suffering from something. And he said, his response is, some are, it's still worth it for the environment to still plant them.
And that's what we don't want to just cut them all down. We want
if that pin oak is diseased, you might want to just make sure that disease isn't going to spread to the other 3.
Well, it's like $500 a year to get an injection, and there's no guarantee the injection will work.
Yeah.
So when you hear that, you're like, oh my goodness.
Right.
And then the other question I had was,
but let me just answer the first question, which is, in his opinion, the white oak is the king of the oaks.
Okay.
But any oak is better than no oak. No, not king of disease.
A white oak doesn't get disease.
Well, that's not to say it can't also get a disease. But as far as being the most environmentally, providing the most ecosystems, it's the best oak. They're pretty hardy. But you're right. The elm trees have gone away. They used to be among the best trees. Diseases happen.
Yeah.
But they're not being decimated. The oak trees are not being decimated. They are still hardy and should be planted. But you're right. You do need to factor in care.
And I really appreciate your presentation, and I understand everything that you're saying, and I agree. But at the same time, I do know a lot of senior citizens are moving to Delaware. And when you're a senior citizen and the older you get, you cannot go out there and do all that weeding and cut back plants that are invasive but are fantastic for the insects or whatever. So I can see why so many people have just grass. They want it to look nice. So they just do the simplest thing. And that's what I've noticed here in Delaware. A lot of people are doing the simplest thing because there's so many senior citizens. So I'm thinking, what can we do to encourage people to do the right thing without it costing so, and plus when you're a senior citizen, you're not bringing in as much money as when you were working full time. So it's like they just, like I had a friend who was in her 80s and she told me she had so many beautiful flowers and beautiful flower beds and all this. And then she told me she hired a landscaping company to pull it all out and just a few things. And so then when the lawn service came in, it was the least amount of money to pay the lawn service.
Yeah, I mean, everybody can only do what everybody can do. And the point is to sort of just spread the word. And for folks who don't have the money, the time, the energy to be able to, I mean, again, long term, these become less expensive, but long term, when you're 90 years old, might mean something different.
Yeah.
But it's putting out a couple of containers, that have beautiful plants for the summer. I mean, it's just we just all have to do the best that we can. We've had a lot. Yeah.
So also on the same vein, while we're doing this, I also want to remind you, in the back here, we have Linda Newsom, and she is presenting on, is it May 1st? Yes. She's presenting here the same thing, only she's going to be talking specifically about what people and a lot of the seniors that you're talking about live in these developments with the small yards and these 55 and over communities. She's going to be specifically addressing the needs of that group. So
you'll like my handout, which is called Tips for an Armchair Eco Warrior.
Very good.
Planting oak. And that's what that workshop is going to be about.
So we're trying to make our series focus on different special areas, and that's her forte, and so that's what she's going to be talking about on May 1st. I know a lot of people signed up for one, they signed up for all. So hope you'll come back for the rest of the series.
Yes, you had the mulch question.
Yes. That was a prior question, but you had mentioned cover crops.
Yeah.
And that there was a website to look for cover crops. I haven't seen it on the papers that we have. Or could you give me keywords, to present to Mr. Google?
I'm actually thinking about doing a cover crop presentation in the fall, so try us out on that.
They have handouts.
Yeah, there's
Right in the front. Right where you go into the extension office, they have handouts on it.
Okay, I think this is my first time here, so thank you for the navigational help.
Yeah, and I would also just Google University of Delaware, extension, cover crops.
Bless you, that's
Linda.
wonderful.
I got some answers for a couple of those. One, although it hasn't been since the pandemic, they quit doing it, but they're doing it again this year. Shooty Park is giving out free mulch, leaf compost. You have to move it, but you can hire some of the landscapers or garden centers who dump truck to dump it for you. Supposedly it's already composted. May the 1st, I think it's one of the days. You'll have to look on the city website. And as to the tree thing, Modern Maturity Center has a lot of landscapers that are affordable and very good. And some of us have used them. We can share resources. And if you want to get rid of the diseased oak, prevent it from spreading, plant a black cherry. It is the second most prolific tree for all the animals. They absolutely love them, and it grows 4 times faster than an oak.
Black cherry.
I didn't hear that What kind of a tree?
Black cherry.
Yeah, it's the native, it's also known as it's a native tree, it's also known as a wild cherry, and actually
So
that's,
does
that's
it
gonna
have
be in my
fruit?
presentation.
It does have tiny fruit, tiny berries,
But it
and the
doesn't
birds
make a-
love it.
But it doesn't make a mess, because the
No,
birds will all eat it up.
the birds will all eat it up,
And
and it feeds all kinds of insects.
Actually,
And is
humans
that a
can eat it
native
if it's cooked.
Delaware
Yeah,
It's on the
tree?
list.
Yes. And that's gonna be addressed in my native edible fruits and nuts presentation at the end of the series also.
And does
a
that make
wonderful tree
babies?
guide.
Does that make a lot of babies?
The birds will replant them.
No.
I have a good
Yeah.
tree guide that's real reasonable and he's excellent.
You do?
Yes.
Tell
I'll
me.
share the resources.
Thank you. Thank
I had one pop up in my landscaping right next to my house, which is of course not right plant, right place. So when trees pop up real close to my house, my husband wants to just pull them out, but I dig them up and I transplant them into a better space. And I had a wild cherry pop up that, was about this big when I dug it up, and I put it out into the edge of my wooded area behind my house, and it's now probably taller than the ceiling. So they'll grow pretty fast.
That's wonderful.
Just a quick word about the city mulch. It is great. It is free. It is not weed free, so it doesn't get composted. So they pick stuff up, and sometimes there's going to be bits of plastic and stuff. So just know it's just. I mean, it's.
Do they treat it with something?
I have no idea.
They don't treat it, but I will tell you, sometimes, like this year wasn't bad because we didn't have a lot of snow, but sometimes there's salt, excess salt in the leaf compost when they're, picking it up, sweeping the streets. But I've gotten it before, and it's been, nice, but it did bring some sedge and stuff that I didn't necessarily want. But luckily they're easy to pick out, but it's free. Yeah. So free's
They
good.
will
Free's
still
free.
load it.
They will load it for you, yes, but you have to take it yourself, yeah.
I have used it too, and there are
Yeah, I
some,
have.
it's not, sometimes there'll be a credit card,
Oh, yeah. Plastic gloves.
because somebody threw it out the car window or whatever after.
Or cigarette butts.
One of these gift
Yeah.
cards or something. But on the whole, it's well worth it.
Yeah, it is.
On the whole, it's worth it.
I've used it in the past, and it made really rich dark soil.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
wow.
works a lot.
There's a couple comments in the chat box here. This was an excellent presentation. Thanks to Kathy and the Master Gardeners for making this available. The second one is we have red oaks dying at our HOA, but it could not be diagnosed yet. We just found out the soil pH was below 5, which is a problem.
Yeah, Judy Pfister, who's a Sussex County Master Gardener, who's on there today. Hi, Judy. She sent me a private message, so you guys probably didn't see it. It says, in Sussex County, we have had issues with large old oaks dying and found that the soil was way too acidic, the same comment, even for oaks. We encourage our helpline clients to do a soil test, water large trees during high heat and drought to reduce stress.
And then Cindy Porter said, loved your presentation and material. And if anyone's interested in becoming a Master Gardener, we do have training this fall. Applications are available and close May 26th. So if you're interested in becoming a Master Gardener, I encourage you to grab a brochure and let me know if you have any questions. We always take more like-minded individuals that like to volunteer and help your community.